The Imperium does not replace what it loses. It simply demands more from what remains. When Forge World Metallica 7 disappeared, no one noticed for 3 months. Not because the Administratum was incompetent, though it was, but because the system was designed to assume nothing could be wrong. A Forge World does not simply vanish. Therefore, when tithes stopped arriving, the first assumption was that paperwork had been misfiled. The second assumption was that the Forge World was withholding production. The third assumption, logged 14 weeks after the initial silence, was that someone should probably check. By then, 7 billion souls had been gone for 105 days. This is not a story about how they died. This is a story about how the Imperium learned they were dead, and what it did with that knowledge. It is a story about faith replacing function, about bureaucracy outlasting truth, and about the moment when an ordinary man realized that the cruelty was not incidental. It was structural. The Forge World had a designation, Metallica 7. It orbited a dying star in the Segmentum Pacificus, 3 weeks warp travel from the nearest navigable route. It had been producing Mark IV Limon Rust battle tanks for 6,000 years. Every 72 hours, a transport flotilla would arrive, collect 400 tanks, and depart. The tanks would be distributed across 17 subsectors. The Forge World would continue its work. The system functioned, until it didn't. A Forge World is not a planet. It is a factory that happens to occupy planetary mass. Metallica 7 had been designated for armored vehicle production during the Age of Apostasy. Before that, it had been a mining world. Before that, a penal colony. Before that, something no one remembered. The Mechanicus had claimed it, consecrated it, and rebuilt it. They hollowed out its mountains, paved over its seas, and filled its atmosphere with a sacramental mix of industrial exhaust and incense vapor. The planet's original ecosystem, if it had one, was irrelevant. What mattered was output. 7 billion people lived there. Most were not Mechanicus. Most were baseline human workers, servitors, indentured laborers, contract serfs, and their families. They lived in hive cities built into the factory complexes, hab blocks squeezed between assembly lines. They were born, worked, bred, and died within sight of the same manufactorum. Some families had worked the same shift rotation for 40 generations. The planet was divided into production zones. Zone Primus produced tank hulls. Zone Secundus manufactured turrets and weapon systems. Zone Tertius handled treads, suspension, and drive assemblies. Zone Quartus performed final assembly. Zone Quintus was the blessing district, where each tank received sacred oils and machine prayers before shipment. Each zone was a city unto itself, populations in the hundreds of millions, all oriented toward a single purpose. The Mechanicus overseers were different. They were tech priests, engine seers, data looms, and magos supervisors. They did not see the workers as people. They saw them as biological components in a production chain. This was not cruelty. This was theology. Flesh was weak. The machine was eternal. To serve the machine was to transcend the limitations of mortality. The workers did not believe this, but they obeyed anyway. Every Forge World operates on faith, not the faith of the ecclesiarchy, though that exists too, but the faith that the system will continue, that Prometheum shipments will arrive, that ore transports will deliver, that the water recyclers will not fail, that the overseers will notice if something goes wrong. This faith is rarely examined. It exists as a background assumption, like gravity or darkness. When it breaks, people do not immediately recognize it. They assume they have made a mistake. They check their calculations. They pray harder. Metallica 7 operated on 17,000 interlocking schedules. Ore arrived from Metallica 4, a lifeless rock 3 astronomical units away, where servo-skull-guided mining rigs carved ferrous metals from ancient impact craters. Prometheum came from the refinery moon, Metallica 3, a volcanic satellite where fuel was distilled from subterranean hydrocarbon deposits. Water was extracted from cometary ice and purified through sacred filtration. Food came as compressed nutrient blocks, shipped in bulk from an agri-world 2 systems away. Every piece had to arrive on time or the entire chain stopped. The chain had never stopped, not in 6,000 years. This was not luck. This was planning. The Mechanicus had calculated every variable, accounted for every contingency. They had backup systems for their backup systems. They had redundancy built into redundancy. They had transformed uncertainty into algorithm, chaos into schedule, fate into function. But they had not accounted for the warp. No one can account for the warp. Thomas Vardain was 43 years old. He had worked in Manufactorum 13 for 26 of those years. He was a quality assurance servitor handler, which meant he supervised the servitors that inspected tank treads for metallurgical defects. It was not glorious work, it was not even skilled work, but it was stable. He had a wife, Mira, 2 children, Alira, 8 years old, and Kovan, 6. A small hab unit in Block 17, 6 levels above the factory floor. The unit had 2 rooms, one where they slept, one where they ate. The walls were bare metal. The floor was reinforced plascrete. There was a single window, 6 inches wide, that looked out onto the factory exhaust towers. Tomas had never left Mechanicus 7. He had never wanted to. The Imperium was vast and terrifying. His world was small and predictable. He woke every day at the same time. 5th bell, when the factorum shift changed and the night workers went home. He would dress in his work coveralls, gray fabric stained with oil and soot. He would kiss Mira goodbye. He would walk 7 minutes through the hab block corridors, descend 6 levels on the cargo lifter, and enter the Manufactorum floor. The floor was a cathedral of industry. The ceiling was lost in smoke and darkness, 200 meters overhead. The conveyor system stretched for kilometers, tank treads moving in endless procession. The servitors worked in silence, their augmetic limbs clicking and whirring as they performed their sacred tasks. The air smelled of promethium, ozone, and sacred unguents. Tomas's station was beside Inspection Bay 7. His job was simple: watch the servitors. If a servitor malfunctioned, report it. If a tread showed defects, mark it for reprocessing. If production slowed, file a report with the shift overseer. He had filed 3 reports in 26 years, 2 for servitor malfunctions, 1 for a metallurgical defect that had traced back to a contaminated ore shipment from Metallica 4. All 3 reports had been acknowledged, logged, and resolved within 48 hours. The system worked. On the morning the Promethium shipment failed to arrive, Tomas noticed nothing. The Manufactorum operated on stored reserves. There was enough fuel for another 6 days. By then, the shipment would arrive. It always did. He worked his shift, 12 hours. The treads moved past him in endless rhythm. The servitors inspected. He watched. Nothing changed. At the end of his shift, he walked home. He ate dinner with his family, reconstituted protein paste flavored with synthetic herbs. Mira asked him about his day. He said it was fine. She smiled. The children played in the corner, building towers from empty ration tins. That night, Tomas lay in bed and listened to the sound of the factorum. The distant rhythm of the conveyor belts, the thrum of the generators, the mechanical heartbeat of the forge world. It was a sound he had heard every night of his life. It was the sound of normalcy. He did not know that normalcy had already ended. On the 2nd day, he noticed the overseers were conducting more inspections than usual. They moved through the factory with Auspex devices, scanning equipment, murmuring in binaric cant. He did not understand what they were looking for. He assumed it was routine maintenance. One of the overseers, a tech priest named Logis Dervan, whose face was more metal than flesh, stopped beside Tomas's station. The tech priest extended a mechadendrite and scanned Inspection Bay 7. The device clicked and hummed. Dervan consulted a data slate, made a notation, and moved on without speaking. Tomas wanted to ask what was wrong. He did not. You did not question the overseers unless they addressed you first. This was not a rule. It was simply how things were done. On the 4th day, the factorum slowed production. Not stopped. Slowed. The shifts were reduced from 18 hours to 12. Workers were told this was due to recalibration schedules. Tomas believed it. He went home early. He spent time with his children. He thought briefly that this was pleasant. Alira asked him why he was home so soon. He told her the machines needed rest, just like people. She accepted this. Children always accepted what their parents said. Kovan asked if they could go outside. Tomas said no. There was no outside on Metallica 7. The atmosphere was toxic. The surface temperature ranged from 200 degrees at the equator to -70 at the poles. The only spaces humans could survive were inside the Hive Cities and Manufactorums, sealed environments with controlled air and temperature. Outside was a word that meant death. On the sixth day, the Prometheum reserves ran dry. The Manufactorum did not explode. It did not collapse. It simply stopped. The conveyor belts ceased moving. The furnaces cooled. The assembly servitors stood motionless at their stations, waiting for orders that would not come. The lights stayed on, powered by the Forge World's plasma reactors. But the work stopped. Thomas stood in the silent factory and felt something he had never felt before. Uncertainty. The other workers stood with him. 2,000 men and women on the Manufactorum floor, staring at the motionless conveyor belts. No one spoke. No one knew what to say. After 17 minutes, an overseer's voice crackled over the Vox system. It was Logis Dervan. His voice was flat, emotionless, processed through a mechanical Vox synthesizer. Workers of Manufactorum 13. Production has been temporarily suspended due to resource allocation delays. You are instructed to return to your HAB units and await further instructions. The machine god watches over all. Compliance is expected. The Vox clicked off. Thomas walked home in silence. Around him, thousands of other workers did the same. The corridors were filled with the sound of footsteps, but no one spoke. Uncertainty had spread like a contagion. No one wanted to voice it. No one wanted to make it real. When he reached his HAB unit, Mira was waiting. She had heard the Vox announcement. She had questions. Tomas had no answers. That night, the food shipment failed to arrive. The Prometheum shipment had been delayed by a warp storm. This was not unusual. Warp travel was unpredictable. Delays happened. The refinery moon, Metallica 3, had dispatched the shipment on schedule. The transport had entered the warp. It had not emerged. The warp is not space. It is a dimension of raw psychic energy, where physical laws dissolve and time becomes meaningless. Ships travel through it by projecting a Gellar field, a bubble of reality, and navigating by the light of the Astronomicon, the psychic beacon that emanates from Terra. A journey that would take centuries through real space takes weeks through the warp. But the warp is never safe. It is inhabited by predators, by daemons, by things that should not exist but do. A ship that enters the warp might emerge centuries too late or centuries too early. It might emerge infested with horrors. It might not emerge at all. The transport carrying Metallica 7's Prometheum shipment encountered a warp storm. The storm had formed spontaneously, a localized vortex of psychic turbulence. The ship's navigator, a mutant psyker whose third eye could perceive the currents of the warp, tried to navigate around it. But the storm expanded too quickly. The ship was caught. The Gellar field held. The crew survived. But the ship was thrown off course, spat out into real space 2 subsectors away. By the time the navigator reoriented and plotted a return course, 3 weeks had passed. The ship eventually reached Metallica 7. By then, everyone was dead. The refinery waited 3 days, then dispatched a second transport. That one also failed to arrive. At this point, the refinery's Magos overseer, Logis Thrax, made a decision. He consulted the sacred protocols. The protocols stated, if 2 consecutive shipments fail to arrive, suspend further shipments until the route is verified stable. This was a reasonable precaution. Prometheum was valuable. The Mechanicus did not waste resources. Thrax suspended shipments. He filed a report with the Sector Navigators Guild, requesting route verification. The report was logged, assigned a priority rating of moderate, and placed in a queue. The queue had 614 items ahead of it. Estimated response time, 4 to 6 weeks. Thrax did not escalate. He assumed the Forge World had sufficient reserves. He assumed they would notify him if the situation was critical. He assumed the system would correct itself. He was wrong, but his assumptions were not unreasonable. They were based on 6,000 years of precedent. The system had always corrected itself. The protocols had always worked. The faith in the machine was not blind. It was evidence-based, until the evidence changed. Metallica 7 had 6 days of Prometheum reserves. This was standard. More than 6 days would be inefficient. Storage took up space that could be used for production. Less than 6 days would be dangerous. 6 days was optimal. When the reserves ran out, the Manufactorum stopped. The planet did not panic. The overseers issued calm statements. The delay was temporary. Prometheum would arrive soon. Workers should remain at their stations. Prayer services would be held to invoke the machine god's favor. Tomas attended the prayer service. He stood in the chapel annex attached to Manufactorum 13, surrounded by 2,000 other workers. A tech priest led them in the litany of efficiency. They chanted in unison, "The machine is eternal. The flesh is temporary. We serve the machine provides." Tomas had chanted these words 1,000 times. They had always been comforting. Now they felt hollow. The chapel annex was a vast chamber, its walls lined with bronze gears and sacred cogwheels. At the far end, a statue of the Omnissiah stood 20 meters tall, its mechanized arms raised in benediction. Incense burned in braziers, filling the air with the scent of sacred oils and synthetic myrrh. The tech priest leading the service was ancient. His name was Magos Velt. He had overseen the blessing rituals for 300 years. His body was more machine than flesh. Mechadendrites coiled from his spine. His eyes were replaced with optical augmetics. His lungs had been replaced with rebreather units that hissed with each breath. Velt raised his arms. The congregation fell silent. "The machine god tests us," Velt said, his voice amplified through Vox speakers embedded in the chapel walls. "In times of hardship, we do not falter. We do not despair. We trust in the sacred protocols. We trust in the designs of the Omnissiah. We trust that the machine will provide." The congregation murmured in agreement. "Flesh is weak," Velt continued. "Flesh hungers, flesh thirsts, flesh fears. But we are more than flesh. We are servants of the machine, and the machine does not fail." Tomas wanted to believe this. He wanted to feel the comfort he had felt in 1,000 previous services. But something had changed. Some part of him, the part that had stood on the silent factory floor, that had seen the motionless conveyor belts, did not believe anymore. He chanted the litany anyway, because everyone else was chanting, because not chanting would mark him as different, because faith, even hollow faith, was better than the alternative. When the service ended, he returned to his hab unit. His wife asked him what was happening. He told her the truth. He did not know. That night, the food shipment failed to arrive. The agri-world that supplied Metallica 7 was named Granus Majoris. It was a breadbasket world, covered in vast grain fields and automated harvesters. The planet's entire surface, 97% arable land, was devoted to food production. There were no cities, no forests, no oceans, just fields stretching to the horizon in every direction, broken only by processing facilities and shipment depots. Granus Majoris produced nutrient blocks for 17 different forge worlds. It operated on a strict schedule. Every 12 days, a transport convoy would depart, carrying compressed food stores to each destination. The convoy to Metallica 7 was scheduled to depart on the 9th day after the Prometheum shipment failed. It loaded on time. 800,000 tons of compressed protein, carbohydrates, and synthesized vitamins, packaged in hermetically sealed containers. The convoy consisted of 6 bulk transports, each the size of a small city. The convoy entered the warp on schedule. It did not arrive. It had encountered the same warp storm. The storm had intensified. What had been a localized disturbance was now a churning vortex, spreading across 3 subsectors. Ships that entered it were torn apart or spat out centuries off course. The Navis Nobilit issued a navigational advisory: avoid the region until the storm dissipates. Estimated duration, 2 to 8 months. No one sent this information to Metallica 7. There was no protocol for it. Forge worlds did not need to be warned about warp storms. They had reserves. They had contingency plans. They would adapt. This assumption was not malicious. It was logical. For 6,000 years, Forge worlds had adapted. They had weathered delays, shortages, and interruptions. They had never failed, until they did. On the 10th day, Metallica 7 began to ration food. Each worker received half their usual nutrient allotment. The overseers explained this was temporary. Food would arrive soon. The machine god tested his servants. Faith would see them through. Tomas cut his portion in half and gave the rest to his children. His wife did the same. On the 12th day, the rations were cut again. On the 15th day, the water recyclers began to fail. Water on Metallica 7 came from cometary ice, harvested by orbital mining platforms and processed through sacred purification systems. The purification systems required Prometheum to operate. Without Prometheum, the systems could not function. The planet had emergency water reserves, enough for 90 days, but those reserves were stored in tanks that required powered pumps to distribute. The plasma reactors still functioned. The lights stayed on, but the distribution pumps were low-priority systems. When power allocation was recalculated, the pumps were depowered to conserve energy for critical infrastructure: the data looms, the communication arrays, the defensive batteries. The water stopped flowing. Tomas stood in his hab unit, staring at the dry faucet. He turned the valve again. Nothing. His wife stood beside him, holding their youngest child. The child was crying, not loudly. A weak, exhausted sound. "What do we do?" she asked. Tomas did not answer. He did not know. On the 16th day, the overseers announced emergency water distribution. Workers were instructed to report to designated collection points. Each family would receive 5 liters per day. This was enough to survive. Barely. Tomas joined the line outside Manufactorum 13. 3,000 workers standing in silence, waiting for their ration. The line moved slowly. It took 4 hours to reach the distribution point. A servitor handed him a plasteel canister. 5 liters. He carried it home carefully, trying not to spill a drop. His children drank first. His children drank first. Then his wife. Then him. The water tasted stale, metallic. It had been sitting in the emergency tanks for decades, but it was water. That night, Kovan asked if they were going to die. Tomas said no. He said the shipments would arrive soon. He said the Emperor would protect them. He did not know if he believed it. On the 20th day, the first riots began. It started in Manufactorum 31, in Zone Secundus. A crowd of workers stormed the overseer's office, demanding answers. They wanted to know when the shipments would arrive. They wanted to know why the tech priests weren't doing anything. They wanted to know why their children were starving. The overseers responded with servitors. Combat servitors, lobotomized humans rebuilt as weapons platforms. They carried shock mauls and riot shields. They did not negotiate. They did not explain. They restored order. 17 workers died. Their bodies were removed. The Manufactorum was sealed for 3 days, then reopened. Production did not resume. There was no promethium, but the workers were ordered to report to their stations anyway, to maintain discipline, to preserve the structure. Tomas heard about the riot through whispered conversations in the hab block corridors. No official announcement was made. The overseers did not acknowledge it, but everyone knew. Fear spread faster than hunger. On the 23rd day, a second riot erupted in Zone Quartus. This one was larger. 5,000 workers. They did not storm the overseers' offices. They stormed the water distribution point. The combat servitors opened fire. 83 workers died. The rest dispersed. Tomas did not join the riots. He stayed in his hab unit with his family. He did not believe the riots would accomplish anything. The overseers did not have food. They did not have water. They were as trapped as the workers. But they had weapons, and weapons enforced structure, even when the structure no longer made sense. On the 27th day, Archmagos Kryn issued a planet-wide Vox address. His voice echoed through every hab block, every manufactorum, every chapel. 7 billion people listened. Servants of the machine, Kryn said. His voice was calm, processed through layers of Vox modulation until it no longer sounded human. The Omnissiah tests our faith. We have endured hardship, we have endured scarcity, but we have not wavered. The shipments will arrive. The Imperium has been notified. Relief is imminent. Maintain your discipline. Maintain your faith. The machine provides. The Vox clicked off. Tomas sat in his hab unit, staring at the Vox speaker mounted on the wall. His children sat beside him. Mira held his hand. "Do you believe him?" she whispered. Tomas did not answer immediately. He thought about the silent manufactorums, the dry faucets, the empty food dispensers, the riots, the bodies. "No," he said finally. Mira's hand tightened around his. "Then what do we do?" "We wait," Tomas said. "What else can we do?" The overseers convened an emergency council. They gathered in the High Manufactorum, the sacred center of Metallica the Seven, beneath a bronze statue of the Omnissiah. 50 tech priests, 17 Magos supervisors, and 1 Archmagos. They discussed the crisis in binaric cant, their voices clicking and humming in machine code. Archmagos Veloth Kryn was 390 years old. He had overseen Metallica 7 for 2 centuries. He had seen famines, plagues, and worker uprisings. He had seen production quotas missed and tithes delayed. He had seen problems and he had solved them. This was not a problem. This was a cascading systemic failure. Kryn consulted the sacred data looms. He reviewed the reports. No promethium, no food, no water. Communication with the greater Imperium was functional, but responses were delayed. The warp storm had disrupted astropathic signals. Messages sent 3 weeks ago had not been acknowledged. The data looms processed the information. They calculated survival probabilities. They ran simulations. They modeled outcomes. The conclusion was irrefutable. Without external resupply, the population of Metallica 7 would last 47 days. After that, mass starvation. After that, total collapse. Kryn turned to his council. We require immediate resupply. I will transmit a priority distress signal. The Mechanicus will respond. Mars will not abandon us. One of the Magos supervisors, a hunched figure whose spine had been replaced with a flexible data conduit, spoke in binaric. The words translated roughly to, "What if they do not respond in time?" Kryn processed the question. "Then we die, but we die as servants of the Omnissiah. Our faith will be recorded. Our sacrifice will be logged. The machine remembers." The council fell silent. Kryn issued the distress signal. He transmitted it on all available channels: astropathic, vox, broad-spectrum emergency frequencies. He invoked the ancient rights of the Mechanicus, the treaties signed with Terra, the sacred oaths of mutual aid. He did not plead. Pleading was inefficient. He stated facts. He quantified the crisis. He requested resources. He waited. The distress signal reached the Segmentum fortress 12 days later. The fortress was a massive star fort, a city-sized structure that served as the military and administrative hub for the entire Segmentum Pacificus. It housed 3 million personnel: naval officers, Imperial Guard commanders, administratum officials, Mechanicus liaisons, and inquisitorial representatives. The signal was received by a junior Vox operator named Helvon Meyer. He was 22 years old. He had been assigned to the Communications Division 6 months earlier. His job was to log incoming transmissions, categorize them by priority, and forward them to the appropriate departments. Helvon received 17,000 transmissions per day. Most were routine: supply requests, status updates, ship movement reports. Some were urgent: requests for military support, reports of Ork incursions, distress signals from merchant vessels. Metallica 7's distress signal was marked as urgent. Helvon read the summary: Forge world experiencing supply chain disruption. Requesting immediate resupply of promethium, water, and food. Population at risk. Helvon categorized it as high priority and forwarded it to subsector resource allocation and crisis management. He did not investigate further. He did not flag it for immediate action. He followed protocol. The department had a backlog of 4,900 requests. Metallica 7's distress signal was assigned a priority rating of high. This placed it at position 217 in the queue. No one read it for 16 days. That, a relief convoy would be dispatched. Total estimated response time 4 to 6 months. Kryn calculated the timeline. He cross-referenced it with survival probabilities. The conclusion was irrefutable. Every person on Metallica 7 would be dead in 37 days. He transmitted another message. He did not request aid. He requested evacuation. He invoked ancient Mechanicus protocols: the right to preserve knowledge, the duty to save tech priests and data looms. The response came 6 days later. Evacuation was not authorized. Forge World Metallica 7 was classified as a strategic asset. Abandoning it would require approval from the Fabricator General of Mars. The request had been forwarded. Estimated response time 12 to 18 weeks. Kryn stood in silence. He processed the information. He ran the calculations again. The conclusion did not change. They were going to die. Not because of enemy action, not because of heresy, not because of incompetence. They were going to die because the system was working as designed. The administratum was following protocols. The forms were being filed. The requests were being logged. The approvals were being sought. Everything was proceeding correctly. And 7 billion people would die before the approvals were granted. Kryn stood beneath the bronze statue of the Omnissiah. He had served the machine god for 390 years. He had believed in the perfection of logic, the supremacy of reason, the divinity of function. Now, for the first time in his existence, he doubted. Not the machine god. He could not doubt the Omnissiah. That would be heresy. But he doubted the Imperium. He doubted the system. He doubted that faith alone could sustain them. On the 34th day, Thomas buried his daughter. Elira had been 8 years old. Her name meant light, in a language Thomas did not speak, a language that, when someone finally did, the response was not immediate action. The response was a request for additional information. The administratum required verification. They had forms, protocols, procedures. How many personnel were affected? What was the nature of the emergency? What resources were required? What was the estimated duration of the crisis? What contingency measures had been implemented? What was the strategic value of the Forge world? What was the impact on tithe production? The request for additional information was transmitted back to Metallica of 7. It was signed by Sub-Administrator Vorentalis, a mid-level bureaucrat who had never left the Segmentum Fortress, who had never set foot on a Forge world, who had never seen starvation. The request was not malicious. It was procedural. The administratum operated on information. Without complete data, decisions could not be made. This was logical. This was efficient. This was how the system worked. The response arrived 31 days after the Prometheum shipment failed. By then, 14,000 people were dead. Archmagos Kryn received the request for additional information. He read it in silence. He processed the words. He understood their meaning. He transmitted the requested information. He detailed the crisis: population size, resource deficits, casualty projections, strategic value. He quantified everything. He made the data looms compile exhaustive reports. He sent 14,000 pages of documentation. He waited. The response came 3 days later. It was not a relief convoy. It was a priority reclassification. Metallica 7's emergency status had been upgraded from high to critical. This meant it would be reviewed by senior administratum officials. Estimated review time, 6 to 10 weeks. After that, resource allocation would be determined. After that, transport logistics would be arranged. After had been dead for 10,000 years. Mira had chosen the name because she liked the sound of it, because it was beautiful. Elira died of dehydration and starvation. Her small body, already thin from rationing, could not survive the deprivation. She grew weaker each day. Her skin turned gray. Her eyes sank. Her breathing became shallow. On the morning of the 34th day, she did not wake up. Tomas held her body. He held her for an hour, sitting on the floor of their hab unit, rocking back and forth. Mira sat beside him, silent. Kovan, his son, 6 years old, too young to understand, asked why Elira was sleeping. Tomas did not answer. Eventually, he stood. He wrapped Elira's body in a blanket. He carried her through the hab block corridors. There was no cemetery. There was no morgue. The overseers had designated Manufactorum 37 as a temporary interment facility. It was a warehouse previously used to store tank treads. Now it stored bodies. Tomas carried Elira through the empty streets. The Forge world was silent. The factories had been shut down for 3 weeks. There was no work. There was no food. There was no water. There was only waiting. He passed other people in the corridors. They did not look at him. They did not acknowledge him. They knew what he was carrying. They had carried the same burden themselves, or would soon. He reached Manufactorum 37. The entrance was guarded by a single servitor, a lobotomized human rebuilt as a sentry. The servitor did not stop him. It simply tracked his movement with its optical sensors, logging his presence. Inside, the warehouse was filled with bodies, hundreds, thousands. They lay in rows, wrapped in blankets or sheets or nothing at all. The air was cold. The overseers had diverted power to refrigeration units to slow decomposition, but the smell was still there, sweet and rotten. The smell of death. A tech priest stood at the entrance, recording names in a data slate. He asked Tomas for Elira's identification number. Tomas gave it. The tech priest logged it and moved on. No prayer, no blessing, just a number in a ledger. Tomas placed Elira's body on the floor, beside hundreds of others. He stood there for a moment, looking at her face. Her eyes were closed. She looked peaceful. He turned and walked away. He did not cry. He did not scream. He did not rage. He simply walked. When he reached his hab unit, Mira was sitting on the floor, holding Kovan. The boy was still alive, barely. His skin was gray. His breathing was shallow. Tomas sat down beside them. He put his arm around Mira's shoulders. "They're not coming," he said. Mira looked up. "What?" "The shipments. The help. They're not coming." "They have to," she said. "We sent the signal. They received it," Tomas said. They logged it. They sent a request for more information. Then we'll send it, she said. We'll tell them. They don't care, Thomas said. The words hung in the air. Mira shook her head. That's not true. The Imperium protects. The Emperor protects. We just have to. The Imperium protects Terra, Thomas said. It protects the Forge worlds that produce Titans. It protects the Hive worlds with billions of soldiers. We make tanks. We're replaceable. Mira stared at him. Tears ran down her face. Then what do we do? Thomas sat down beside her. He put his arm around her shoulders. He looked at his son, at the boy's sunken eyes and cracked lips. We wait, he said. On the 38th day, the water ran out completely. Not just at the distribution points. Everywhere. The emergency reserves were depleted. The pumps had been offline for weeks. The recyclers had failed. There was no more water. People began to die faster. Dehydration killed more efficiently than starvation. The body could survive weeks without food. Without water, it lasted days. 3, maybe 4, before the organs shut down. Tomas rationed the last canister of water. He gave it all to Kovan. Mira protested. Tomas refused to listen. The boy was 6 years old. He deserved a chance. Mira died on the 40th day. She died in her sleep, lying beside Tomas on the floor of their Hab unit. Her body simply stopped. No drama. No final words. She was there, and then she wasn't. Tomas held her hand for an hour. Then he let go. He stood. He walked to the corner where Kovan lay, wrapped in blankets. The boy was unconscious. His breathing was so shallow it was almost imperceptible. Tomas sat beside his son and waited. On the 43rd day, Tomas went outside. Not outside the Hive City, that was impossible, but outside his Hab unit. He walked through the corridors of Block 17. Most of the doors were open. Most of the units were empty or filled with bodies. He walked down to the manufactorum level. The factory floor was silent. Dust had settled on the conveyor belts. The servitors stood motionless at their stations, their power cells depleted. Without promethium to fuel the generators, even the servitors had died. Tomas walked to his station, Inspection Bay 7. He stood there for a long time, looking at the silent machinery. He had worked here for 26 years. He had inspected tank treads. He had watched servitors. He had filed reports. He had believed the system worked. Now he understood. The system did work. It worked perfectly. It processed requests. It filed reports. It followed protocols. It maintained structure. But the system did not care about people. People were components, biological machinery. When they broke, they were replaced. When they died, they were logged and forgotten. This was not a flaw. This was the design. The Imperium did not exist to protect humanity. Humanity existed to fuel the Imperium. Tomas stood in the silent factory and laughed. It was a hollow sound, echoing off the metal walls. He laughed until he couldn't anymore. Then he sat down on the factory floor and closed his eyes. On the 47th day, the last of the emergency power reserves failed. The lights went out across Metallica 7. 7 billion people, most of them already dead, sat in darkness. Tomas died on the 51st day. He died in his Hab unit, alone. Kovan had died 2 days earlier. Mira's body lay beside him, cold and still. Tomas's last thought was not of his family. It was not of the Emperor. It was not even of anger. It was of the factory. The silent conveyor belts, the motionless servitors, the system that had sustained him for 43 years and then abandoned him without malice, without thought, without even noticing. His last thought was, this is how it was always going to end, and then he was gone. By the 60th day, the planet was silent. 7 billion people, gone. No one attacked Metallica 7. No enemy breached its defenses. No heresy corrupted its people. No plague swept through its population. It simply ran out of resources. And the Imperium, vast and terrible and indifferent, processed the loss as data pay. The Administratum received confirmation of Metallica 7's status 4 months later. A scout ship, dispatched to investigate the lack of response, entered the system and conducted orbital scans. The readings were conclusive. No life signs, no thermal activity, no Vox signals. The Forge world was dead. The scout ship transmitted its findings. The report was logged, reviewed, and filed. A notation was added to Metallica 7's entry in the Imperial Register. Status, non-operational. Cause, supply chain interruption. Recommendation, salvage and reassignment. 6 months after that, a Mechanicus reclamation fleet arrived. They landed on the dead world, walked through the silent factories, and cataloged the equipment. The Lehman Russ production line was still intact. The machinery was functional. It could be reactivated if promethium and workers were supplied. The fleet stripped the factories of valuable technology. They collected data looms, sacred texts, and irreplaceable schematics. They removed blessed machinery, consecrated tools, and archaeotech components. They left the bodies. There were too many to bury. The reclamation crews sealed the Hive Cities and marked them as contaminated zones. Biohazard protocols were enacted. Entry was forbidden without proper authorization. Before they left, they updated the planetary designation. Metallica 7 was reclassified as Metallica Sep, deceased. The production quota was reassigned to Forge World Griffon 4. The tithe schedule was adjusted. The system adapted. 3 years later, a new Forge World was founded in the same sector. It was named Metallica 8. Workers were transported from overpopulated hive worlds. Overseers were assigned. Production began. The new Forge World began producing Lehman Russ battle tanks. The Imperium's production capacity was restored. No one spoke of Metallica 7. There was no memorial, no mourning, no investigation into what went wrong. The Administratum had reviewed the case. Their conclusion was documented in a 1,400-page report filed in triplicate and archived in a subvault on Terra. The report analyzed every decision, every protocol followed, every delay documented. The conclusion was, the system had functioned correctly. The protocols had been followed, the forms had been filed, the requests had been processed, the approvals had been sought, the delays were unavoidable. Warp travel was unpredictable. Warp storms were acts of fate, not negligence. The loss of Metallica 7 was tragic, but not exceptional. Recommendations for improvement? None. The system was operating at optimal efficiency. The casualties were regrettable but acceptable. This was the official record. It was also a lie, because the truth was simpler and more terrible. The Imperium could have saved Metallica 7. Ships could have been diverted. Emergency protocols could have been invoked. Exceptions could have been made. But exceptions set precedents, and precedents undermined structure. If the Imperium made an exception for Metallica 7, it would have to make exceptions for others. And if it made exceptions for everyone, the system would collapse. Better to let 7 billion die than to compromise the structure. This was not cruelty. This was logic. This was how the Imperium survived. The story of Metallica 7 is not unique. It is a parable, one that repeats across the Imperium in 10,000 variations. A Forge world starves, a Hive city loses oxygen, a regiment is abandoned on a dying world, a Space Marine Legion is burned to ash. The names change, the scale changes, the outcome does not. The Thousand Sons were doomed for the same reason Metallica 7 was doomed. Not because they were evil, not because they were corrupt, not because they were weak. They were doomed because the Imperium had already decided they were expendable. When the Space Wolves came to Prospero, they did not come to save the Thousand Sons from corruption. They came to eliminate a problem. The Thousand Sons were a variable that could not be controlled. They pursued knowledge. They questioned doctrine. They sought understanding. The Imperium does not tolerate this. The Emperor had convened the Council of Nicaea. He had listened to arguments from both sides, those who believed in regulating psychic power and those who believed in banning it entirely. The Thousand Sons, led by their Primarch Magnus, argued for regulation. They believed knowledge was sacred. They believed understanding was strength. The Emperor ruled against them. The Edict of Nicaea was not a compromise. It was a condemnation. Psychers could be used, but only as sanctioned tools. Navigators, astropaths, and librarians operating under strict oversight. Independent psychic research was forbidden. Magnus obeyed, publicly. But privately, he continued his studies. He believed he could master the warp. He believed he could prove the Emperor wrong. When Horus began his rebellion, Magnus saw the truth in the warp. He saw his brother's betrayal before it manifested. He tried to warn the Emperor, but the Emperor was deep in his secret project beneath the Imperial Palace. The Webway, a means to free humanity from dependence on the warp. Magnus's psychic warning shattered the wards protecting the project. Daemons flooded into the Imperial dungeon. Thousands died. The Emperor's grand design was crippled. Magnus had tried to save the Imperium. Instead, he had crippled it. The Emperor was furious, not just at the damage, but at the disobedience. Magnus had broken the edict. He had used the very powers the Emperor had forbidden. The Emperor sent Leman Russ to Prospero. The orders were, bring Magnus to Terra to answer for his crimes. But Horus intercepted those orders. Horus, already turned to chaos, whispered to Leman Russ. He convinced the Wolf King that Magnus was too dangerous to capture, that the Thousand Sons were corrupted beyond redemption, that mercy was weakness. Leman Russ changed his orders, not to capture, to exterminate. When the Space Wolves arrived at Prospero, they did not negotiate, they did not demand surrender. They attacked. The burning of Prospero was not a battle, it was an execution. The Thousand Sons tried to defend themselves. They were a legion of scholars and psychers, not warriors. They fought desperately, using every scrap of knowledge, every forbidden technique. They summoned warp fire. They called upon demons. They broke every rule the Emperor had set, because they had no choice. When the Imperium decides you are guilty, there is no appeal. There is no mercy. There is only annihilation or damnation. The Thousand Sons chose damnation. Magnus, seeing his legion destroyed, his planet burning, his sons dying, made a final choice. He called upon the chaos god Tzeentch, the changer of ways, the lord of sorcery. He made a bargain. He offered his soul and the souls of his legion in exchange for survival. Tzeentch accepted. The surviving Thousand Sons were transformed. Their bodies became dust, their souls bound to their armor. They became the Rubricae, sorcerer warriors cursed to eternal service. Magnus himself became a demon prince, a being of warp stuff, powerful and terrible and damned. The Imperium recorded their fall as proof of their guilt. The official histories say Magnus was corrupted, the Thousand Sons embraced heresy. They were destroyed because they were traitors. But the truth is simpler. Magnus tried to save the Imperium. He broke the rules to do it, and the Imperium punished him. The Thousand Sons were scholars in an empire that valued obedience over understanding. They were psychers in an Imperium that feared the warp. They were different in an Imperium that demanded conformity. They were doomed from the start. Not because of Horus, not because of Tzeentch, not because of Magnus's pride. They were doomed because the Imperium cannot tolerate exceptions. The parallels are exact. Metallica 7 followed the protocols. They sent distress signals. They provided documentation. They waited for the system to respond. The Thousand Sons followed the Emperor. They served humanity. They fought in the Great Crusade. They waited for understanding. Both were told the system would protect them. Both discovered the system only protected itself. After Prospero burned, the Imperium did not mourn. It did not question. It simply updated its records. The Thousand Sons were reclassified from Imperial Space Marine Legion to Traitor Legion. Their colors were struck from the honor rolls. Their name became a curse. Forge World Metallica 7 was reclassified from operational to deceased. Its production quota was reassigned. Its name became a footnote. The system adapted. The system endured, and the Imperium moved on. There is a prayer spoken in the Forge Worlds, in the Hive Cities, in the troop transports hurtling through the void. It is not an official prayer. It is not found in any ecclesiarchal text. But the workers speak it quietly when the overseers are not listening. The Emperor protects the Imperium. The Imperium protects itself. We protect each other, because no one else will. Tomas Vardane never spoke this prayer. He did not live long enough to learn it. But in the silent factories of Metallica's Seventh, in the Hab units where families held each other as they died, in the last moments before the darkness came, they understood it. The prayer is a recognition, an acceptance. The Imperium is not evil. It is not cruel. It is not even uncaring. It is simply a machine, a vast, grinding, relentless machine that consumes worlds and spits out corpses. A machine that runs on faith and blood and the belief that tomorrow will be the same as yesterday. The machine does not hate you. It does not love you. It does not even see you. You are fuel. And when you burn out, the machine continues. Subject: Forge World Metallica Seb status: deceased. Date of cessation: 447.M41. Cause: supply chain interruption due to warp storm activity. Casualties: 742,000, 188,391 estimated. Salvage status: complete. Reassignment: production quota transferred to Griffonor. Lessons learned: none. Recommendations: none. Priority rating: closed. Addendum, Scribe's Note. The warp storm that caused the supply disruption dissipated 6 weeks after the population of Metallica 7 expired. Transport lanes were restored to full operational capacity. Promethium shipments resumed to the now-defunct Forge world. 3 transports arrived at the dead planet before the recall order was issued. The Promethium was recovered and redistributed. No waste occurred. Secondary Addendum. In the year following the loss of Metallica 7, Lehman Russ production across the Segmentum Pacificus decreased by 2.4%. This shortfall was compensated for by increased output from Forge Worlds Griffon 4, Styges 8, and Mars. Total armored vehicle production for the sector increased by 0.7% compared to the previous year. Tertiary Addendum. A review of communication protocols was conducted to determine if the response time to Metallica 7's distress signal could have been improved. The review concluded that all protocols were followed correctly. No procedural changes were recommended. Estimated cost of implementing faster response systems, 847 billion thrones. Estimated benefit, minimal. Recommendation, maintain current protocols. Final notation. The Imperium's capacity to produce war machines remains undiminished. The loss of Metallica 7 has been absorbed. The system adapts. The system endures. Seal of verification, Adept Logisticaris Vren Morthis, Subsector Resource Management, Segmentum Pacificus Command. Filing status archived, access level restricted. Last accessed 449.m41. Next review date 549m41. The stars do not mourn the dead. The Imperium does not pause. And somewhere, in another system, another Forge world continues its work. The tanks roll off the production line, 400 every 72 hours. The workers take their shifts, 18 hours on, 6 hours off. The overseers watch, the tech priests pray, the system functions. It always has, it always will. The machine is eternal. The flesh is temporary. We serve the machine provides. The prayer echoes through empty halls. No one is left to hear it. But it continues anyway. Because the Imperium does not need believers, it only needs belief. And belief does not die with the faithful. It outlives them. It adapts. It endures. In the subvaults of Terra, in archives that stretch for kilometers beneath the Administratum towers, the report on Metallica 7 sits beside 10,000 others. Forge worlds that failed. Hive cities that collapsed. Regiments that were abandoned. Legions that fell. Each one a tragedy. Each one a footnote. Each one proof that the system works. Because the Imperium does not measure success by survival, it measures success by continuity. And the Imperium continues. It has continued for 10,000 years. It will continue for 10,000 more. And when it finally falls, if it falls, it will not be because of cruelty or incompetence or malice. It will fall because the machine finally ran out of fuel, because there were no more worlds to burn, no more lives to consume, no more faith to harvest. But until that day comes, the system functions. The prayers are spoken, the reports are filed, the dead are forgotten, and the Imperium endures. His children are forgotten. Thomas Vardane is forgotten. His name exists only as an identification number in a data loom, buried in a warehouse on a dead planet. His children are forgotten. His wife is forgotten. The 7 billion souls of Metallica 7 are forgotten. But the tanks they built still fight. On distant worlds, in distant wars, Lehman Russ battle tanks bearing the Manufactorum seal of Metallica 7 roll across battlefields. Their crews do not know where the tanks came from. They do not know who built them. They do not care. The tanks function. That is all that matters. And when those tanks are destroyed, they will be replaced by tanks from Griffon 4 or Styges 8 or Mars. The source does not matter, only the function. This is the truth. The Imperium will never speak. It does not protect humanity. It uses humanity. It burns through lives the way a furnace burns through coal. And when the fuel runs out, it finds more. This is not evil. This is efficiency. This is survival. And survival, in the grim darkness of the far future, is the only virtue that matters. End record. The Emperor protects, but the Imperium decides who is worth protecting. Final thought unlogged from a scribe whose name has been redacted. I have reviewed the files. I have read the reports. I have seen the casualty figures. 7 billion. 7 billion people died because of a warp storm and procedural delays. The review concluded no one was at fault. But someone must be at fault. Someone made the decision that paperwork was more important than lives. Someone decided that protocols were more sacred than survival. Someone decided that maintaining structure was worth the price of worlds. I do not know who that someone is. I do not think there is a someone. I think it is the system itself. And that is more terrifying than any enemy. Because you can fight an enemy, you can resist a tyrant, you can rebel against a master, but how do you fight a system that operates without malice, that kills without hatred, that condemns without judgment? You cannot. You can only serve or die, and most of us will do both. This scribe was investigated for ideological deviance. No heresy was found. He was reassigned to a penal legion. He died 6 months later in the siege of Calth. His name has been removed from all records. The system continues. End entry.